So, the topic that I want to discuss today is the idea of control and helplessness, and so just some ideas around that. The first one being sort of the human desire for control versus the ideas of like let go and let God. God is in control, especially within the context of the coronavirus epidemic that we are all in right now. Because I don't know about you, but I feel pretty out of control and helpless and powerless right now. A lot of the helplessness I feel is when I look at the world in general and think about how little I can do to help everyone who's suffering on such an enormous scale. But my brain also, humans tend to be a bit self centered. It makes sense. We're seeing the world through our lens and we're most impacted by the people around us. So I'm also thinking about how I'm helpless just for me and my wife. Leah, my wife, is an audiologist and ear doctor who works at a hospital. And because all non essential duties for audiologists have been canceled for the duration of the epidemic, Leah has been reassigned from ear doctor stuff to taking phone calls and doing organizational stuff for the hospital's infection department. The people who are working most directly with the COVID patients, which really freaks me out. I am genuinely very proud of Leah and the important work she's doing for this very important department at her hospital. But I'm also scared that she's gonna come into contact with coronavirus through the work she does. And I feel really helpless and powerless to stop that from happening. I can't go to her work and shield her from any possible encounter. And there's only so much she can do, too, right? She has a little control. She can wash her hands and practice other safety measures. But in the end, there's only so much any of us can do. I think humans have various solutions to feeling powerless like this. And some of those solutions really bring out the worst of our human nature, such as the desire to find someone to blame, someone to point a finger at and say, you're the reason that we're all dealing with this epidemic. It's all your fault. There's people being incredibly racist right now and blaming China. I think when we're sort of searching for a cause for something bad happening, that in itself, that search isn't a bad thing. It's fine to ask the question of why is this happening to us? But when the answer is something like, oh, it's China's fault, or oh, the gays are to blame, this is God's punishment for letting gay people exist, or whatever nonsense people are coming up with, obviously that's way more harmful than helpful. It's not really giving you any more control or power over the situation. It's just giving you the chance to hurt others who are probably more vulnerable than you. Other people are coming up with this idea that, oh, look at how much pollution has dropped while people have been self quarantined during this pandemic. This is just Mother Nature's way of cleaning the world and getting rid of our pollution because humanity's the real virus. While absolutely humanity does cause a lot of harm to the environment, these kinds of suggestions that humans are the real virus tends to be really racist and ableist and classist and so many other ways of having some sort of eugenic afterthought there, because Mother Nature is not killing all of us with the coronavirus. The people most likely to get it are very vulnerable people. Racism makes it so that more people of color, especially black people and indigenous people, have less access to life-saving resources, and also they have jobs that they can't stop doing or they're not going to have money to survive. And they and people with disabilities and chronic illnesses and the like are also more likely to get the illness and be denied life-saving treatment. There's been a lot of talk about saving ventilators for the people most likely to survive. I get that decisions have to be made about who gets those things, but the ableism inherent in decisions like that, like who gets to make those decisions, is going to kill some of the most vulnerable people in our societies. There's going to be assumptions that someone with a disability has a lesser quality of life anyway, or they're just less likely to survive, so we won't give them the ventilator. These are all stemming from, I think, the human desire to be in control a little bit. If we can just control who gets the resources, that means I will get the resources. Okay, so putting that to the side for a moment, I want to sort of go into the next tangent on this discussion about control and helplessness. And that's this idea of like, let go and let God. God is in control. And this is the part where I sort of have the least like coherent thing to say. I'm struggling to sort of think about it myself. And so I would love some thoughts on this. I always have this struggle within myself of being like, yes, I want to sort of give my life to God. I want to submit to God and let God use me as an instrument of God's blessing in the world. There's that part of me, and then there's the part of me that really balks at this idea of God taking over my life, of God being a controller. Part of that is the human tendency, especially in a culture like mine that is so individualized, where I want to be in control of my own life. I don't want to be told what to do. I want my free will to be completely unhindered or whatever. But then there's also a lot of the language used to talk about God being in control is very similar or even verbatim to the kind of language used by abusers. The idea of being used by God, the idea of handing over control completely to God, sends up a lot of red flags for me, because if you study abuse and trauma theories, you're going to see that the first thing an abuser does is they isolate their victim and take control completely away from the victim. They make it so this person has no say over what they do with their time and energy, who they associate with. So making sure that humans have control over their own lives and agency is really important to helping people who are experiencing or have experienced abuse. So when we talk about God being in control, and especially language like me submitting to God, I get kind of scared. But I remind myself that God being in control of my life looks completely different from a human being being in control of me. Because while a human being might claim something like, oh, I have your best interests at heart, I know better than you do about what's good for you. And they're going to sort of suck all my energy away from me, and they are going to isolate me. God, when God is in control of my life, God does the exact opposite. Instead of taking my power from me, God empowers me and connects me to community. God doesn't isolate me from everyone, but instead gives me the energy and the sort of guidance I need to get out into the world and form relationships with other human beings and with creation as a whole. So God's control looks so different from a human person's control over any other human, if that makes sense. So, yeah. And I gotta say, times like these, when the world has gone to shit and I don't know what to do and I feel so helpless and powerless, and there's only so much I can do to control the situation, I would love for Jesus to take the wheel, because I don't know what to do. No one knows what's going on. The people in power who could do something to help, they're not doing the right things. Take the wheel and get them to do the right things, please. If they would be receptive or to your will in their life, maybe they would make the right laws and share their resources and their wealth in ways that help the most vulnerable and get this pandemic ended as soon as possible. You know what I mean, guys? Let me know if you have thoughts on this, because I don't know what I'm saying, TBH. But one thing I did want to bring to this conversation is a passage from this book, A Tree Full of Angels, by Macrina of Wiederkehr, if I'm saying that right, who is a Catholic nun. It's just full of little devotionals about seeing God in the everyday. And one of the passages that really speaks to me when it comes to the idea of like submitting to God is a passage she has on receptivity, being receptive to God, as opposed to being sort of passive to God. Because that's the thing. When God is in control of our lives. We are not put in a passive position. Receiving from God doesn't make us passive, because God instead empowers us to be active agents of blessing to others. So here's her passage. Do you remember when you were born? What did you have to boast of then? What freedom to be so little that you protested not when good was being done for you. You did not refuse when gifts were being given to you. There was such a moment of receptivity. That was long ago, at your beginning, till you were no longer content with being little. You began to fight it and despair of it, and so your littleness lost its tremendous power and meaning. It became something to deny and run from, rather than a way of being, a stance of life to be embraced and understood, thus making it possible for you to live with open hands, as a beggar waiting for each moment's new gifts. But then she says, what God most longs to discover in us is our willingness to embrace ourselves as we are at our beginning, empty, little, and poor. Our willingness gives God free space within us to work out the divine plan. Our potential for greatness is tremendous. Acceptance of our littleness makes it possible for our greatness to emerge. Our littleness is not a choice, it is simply the way we are. Our greatness, however, is a choice. When we choose to accept the life God has given us, when we allow God to fill our emptiness, we are choosing greatness. Who can deny our call to greatness? Who can deny our call to be saints? So for me, this idea of our littleness being fed by God and sort of paving the way to greatness, if we sort of reword that a little bit, our littleness involves our helplessness, our dependence on other human beings, our dependence on God in order to survive. She says we have to accept that littleness rather than running from it. And so in this pandemic, accepting that we're not in control is a big part of feeling empowered to do what we can, if that makes sense in this time. We accept our helplessness. We accept that we need God to take some control in our lives. When we acknowledge this helplessness, this emptiness, it gives God space. She says that it gives God free space within us to fill us up with power. When God takes control, God doesn't wrest power from us. Rather, God gives us more power, empowers us to be agents of divine blessing in the world. And so in this time of coronavirus, we know there's only so much we can do as individuals and even as a community. But there are some things we have control over. And when we acknowledge where we're helpless, we can also acknowledge where we do have control. Some things I can think of that I have control over is I don't have control over the fact that my wife has to work at a hospital where she might be exposed to coronavirus, but I do have control over how I treat her when she comes home. I do what I can to sort of avoid being snippy towards her and saying mean things out of my own fear, and instead do little acts of kindness for her, like keeping the house clean, and baking her cookies, because cookies make everything better, right? I don't have control over whether I'm exposed in the grocery store when I have to go out to get groceries. There's only so much I can do to protect myself and the other people there, but I do have control over how I treat the employees that I run into there. Doing what I can to maintain 6 feet of distance from them, doing what I can to make sure I don't touch something and make it dirty that then they're going to have to touch, things like that. We have that control over our little acts of kindness we can do. I may be stuck inside and can't reach out physically to people, but I can call them up. Technology is a great gift in this time. There is a lot of power in reaching out over the internet or through our phones to people we think might be in need, asking them how we can be of service to them. I am so thankful right now for churches and other groups who are holding online services and studies and just chatting times, where They're helping people who feel really isolated, feel connected to other people and to the divine. We also have we have some power when it comes to calling representatives, calling and demanding that they do what's right. So yeah, it can be really, really freaking scary to know that we don't have control over a lot of stuff right now. But if we sort of accept that we don't have that control and we open ourselves to receiving God's power in our lives, God won't take over in a way that strips us of free will. God will take over in a way that empowers us to do everything we can to be God's blessing in this very hurting world. That's all I got. Feel free to tell me what you think. If you disagree, if you agree, if you have more examples of this idea of control and helplessness, you want to vent about how you're feeling, whatever, feel free. Stay safe, do what you can. Know that I'm praying for each and every one of you.